All right, let's see what we got going. Hi, Brian. I am Abe with my shirt. Oh my God, I'm so sick of the political polls and the texting. Let's see here. And so you got to do the polls. You should do the polls anyway. You should do the polls. I'm doing one right now because you should do these things. I do them just so I could say, if they're asking, I can vote, say I'm voting third party and increase the polling numbers by one guy. That's my target. But I just thought, hey, I should get on here just briefly and talk about the decision. I already did a quick video on this and called myself a hypocrite. I understand that I'm a states' rights guy. So for me to come on here and say I think the Supreme Court is right again makes me look like a big right-wing homer. I get that. But there is a difference. And maybe you could bear with me, and maybe somebody in the comment section will tell me what a hypocrite I am and why I'm wrong. But at the end of the day, I don't think. Well, first, I think the Supreme Court interpreted 14 right by saying that the fifth, Section 5, grants the federal government the authority over kind of the interpretation of 3 or whatever, however they kind of phrased it. But I think more importantly, and this is as somebody who did not and is not going to vote for Trump, I just think that the idea that because we live in this shitty two-party system, that we live in the shitty two-party system, that you cannot, individual states, what you're going to end up with is red states and blue states just throwing the opposition, the opposing parties, presumptive nominee off the ballot. That's what you're going to end up with. You're going to have attorney generals and deep red states putting charges on Democrat candidates, and the Republicans going, well, see, look, here's the court filings, or here's the paperwork, and you're going to have, blue states doing it. And so eventually that's it. You can't just, the purview of this sits with the federal government, according to the Constitution. But I think I honestly think the Supreme Court's like, no, we're not going to have a civil war over Donald Trump. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to let it happen. That's just my take. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a Supreme Court justice or a judge or anything where I would be in a position to say I have the legal expertise to tell you why this is the right ruling. My gut, it's a feeling that just says the idea that we're going to let states pick and choose who's on the presidential ballot is a horrible idea. I generally think that the Supreme Court was like, you can make a legal argument for just about anything. And I think the Supreme Court was like, look, we're not going to have a civil war over Donald Trump. We're just not going to do it. I don't think it goes any deeper than that. My own opinions about what went on January 6th, I think it's a pretty weak case to say that he incited insurrection. I just think it's a weak case. I don't think that if you look at his speech and the words he was saying and what took place at the Capitol, I think it's a pretty big stretch. It's a pretty big leap to say he incited a riot there. And at the end of the day, I would go back to the Summer of Love 2020, and I would say, okay, fine. By the literal definition of an insurrection, then you have to bring Democrats who encouraged the protests and told people to fight and told people to get in people's faces and all that. You have to bring them up on charges. That was insurrection behavior as well. So you don't get to. And at the end of the day, like I said, I think it's a very difficult to tie speech to acts, right? To say if you're going to say they incited this person to do this thing, that's actually from a legal precedent perspective, my understanding is that's a very difficult thing to do. So I think that's look at that. I got comments getting filtered. I'm getting called nasty names, I think. Seems like the Republicans are looking for any reason to start a civil war. So it honestly, for me, this seems like an odd, I'm going to pin this comment for a second while I reply to this. It just seems to me odd that I'm going to assume you're a Democrat. Maybe I'm wrong. But it just seems odd to me that you have the Department of Justice under Joe Biden literally throwing who is absolutely the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party off the ballot in states. That's a thing that's happening. The Department of Justice is going after him. You have attorney generals in different states going after him. They're trying to remove him from the ballot, and then you go, the Republicans are trying to start a civil war. That seems odd to me. It seems like a little projection. I would say the most dangerous thing you could do if you're talking about a civil war is saying, we're not going to let your candidate run in a bunch of states. But I mean, tell me how I'm wrong, I guess. That's where my take on that is it's, if you're Biden has no say in a state like Colorado removing Trump. Well, I didn't say Biden. You said Republicans. So I'm saying Democrats. Who's removing the presumptive nominee from ballots? These are Democrats. These are people on the left in Georgia and Colorado and Illinois. These are Democrats who are trying to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. So to say that it's the Republicans that are trying to march us towards civil war, I think is a little disingenuous. I think it's a little projection-like. And look, but from the perspective of anything the federal government does, the Department of Justice answers to the President of the United States. At the end of the day, the President of the United States directs the Department of Justice to do things. I mean, that's just the way it is. I had an interesting conversation because I'm trying to think back, and like I said, I didn't vote for Donald Trump in either race. I don't plan on voting, and especially now I'm in South Carolina. I'm not in a swing state, so I'm certainly not going to vote for him this time. But it was interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody at work today, and I started thinking about, if I were in a swing state, am I getting to a place where I would potentially vote for Donald Trump? And so I tried to wrap my head around, like, why would I vote for a Donald Trump? And the only thing I could come up with, and I say the only thing, but it's a pretty big freaking deal, is when I watch what's going on, like with the World Economic Forum and these global conflicts that we're starting to have with Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, Russia, all the stuff that is kind of happening right now, our massive like death spiral of debt right now. There is a global agenda here. The World Economic Forum has a global agenda. And I really feel like Donald Trump, for all of his flaws and all the things I don't like about him, I do believe he is, and this is probably why so much of the status quo is standing against him. I believe that Donald Trump is maybe the best opportunity to protect American sovereignty from a global agenda, which sounds super, super conspiratorial. I get it. But he got us out of TPP. He got us out of the Paris Climate Accords. He's critical of NATO and our role in NATO. It just feels like, and I know a lot of people would accuse him of being an isolationist. Maybe he is. I don't like his tariff thing. I don't like the fact that he's, throwing tariffs on Chinese goods, and he's not a free trader. I don't like that at all. But I do feel like he's genuinely opposed to the overall, like I said, World Economic Forum, International Monetary Fund, World Bank. He's against that agenda. I think if Donald Trump had Vivek Ramaswamy's ability to speak, he'd be unstoppable. But here's the problem. The problem with Trump is that there's bad policy there too, right? There's bad policy with Trump. Like I said, trade embargoes, tariffs, those kinds of things, that's bad policy. He was a huge spender while he was president of the United States. We spent a ton of money. Donald Trump did not reverse NDAA. He didn't do anything to protect American privacy, Patriot Act, all this different stuff that we've all opposed. I think Democrats and libertarians, the place where we would agree is that these things are absolutely ridiculous and should be reversed. Warrantless wiretapping, all this stuff. He didn't do anything about that. And so he's not my guy by any stretch of the imagination. He has a ton of flaws. But if I look at a Joe Biden and his administration and a Donald Trump and the administration he'd bring in, I do feel like it's important that the United States maintain and establish almost in more certain terms that it's sovereignty from. So it's sovereignty from, yeah, not a good day for Democrats. I mean, it's not about them running him. So here's an interesting thing. The party that wants to protect democracy, the Democrats, their primaries are pretty much irrelevant. They have superdelegates. They choose who their candidate is. The Republicans don't do it that way, and he's dominating in the primaries. If they don't want him to run, then they've got to have somebody who can beat him, and nobody's close. It's not a matter. So what's interesting to me is that, Joe Biden keeps referring, and I think Democrats, politicians in general, refer a lot to. Oh, by the way, could somebody in the comment section tell me how the sound is coming through? This is a new setup for me. I meant to ask that right at the beginning. So if somebody could just throw a comment in there and say, hey, you sound good. I can barely hear you, whatever. But anyway, Donald Trump, Joe Biden talks about MAGA Republicans as if it's this small section of the Republican Party. The primaries are proving that that's absolutely not true. Even with Democrats going out and voting for Nikki Haley, she got destroyed. She got blown out of the. She got the brakes beaten off of her here in her home state of South Carolina. This is who the Republicans want. So yeah, it's not like the party's running him again. The Republican voters want Donald Trump to be their guy. And I'll be honest with you, he was dead. I think he was dead in the water. And I believe it is the Democrats who resurrected Donald Trump. They brought him back from the dead. If it hadn't been, nobody was talking about Trump. Trump's political career was pretty much over after he lost January 6th. He loses the election. You have January 6th. This guy's done. And then we're going to charge him here. We're going to charge him there. We're going to start bringing these cases against him. And that really fired up his base. And I think that a lot of Republicans are looking at this as, look, we don't like the guy, but we're not going to let you persecute him politically, whether you agree with that or not, or believe that that's what's happening or not. I think that was the resurrection of Donald Trump. Much like Hillary Clinton's campaign elevated him in 2016, the Democrats are elevating him now. They run a by foreign. Somebody asked me if I could talk to opposition. I think that the Supreme Court made the right call here, but I'm not a Trumpster. So I'm not going to get involved in a conversation where I have to sit here and like support Donald Trump or defend Donald Trump. I'm telling you things that I like about him, telling you things that I dislike about him. I've said it before. I said it again. I'll say it again. I didn't vote for him in either race. I don't plan on voting for him this time. Gun to my head, do I have to choose between him or Biden? I'd probably choose him, but the margin's not as wide as people would like to think it is. Trump was with the worst people. Lauren Boebert, she's a character. But yeah, I agree. I just think that at the end of the day, it's a bad look. It's a bad look saying that the case against him. I would say, I guess here's the bottom line in this thing would be this, and you'd like to think that the same rules apply to all people across the board, and nobody's above the law and all this stuff. We like to have these conversations or say those kinds of things. But the fact of the matter is that when you're talking about a former president of the United States and the presumptive nominee of the opposition party, you can't have there can't be your indictments, your cases against them can't be questionable. They have to be rock freaking solid. They have to be unshakable, unquestionable. And I think that's part of the reason that they wish they'd stop suppressing RFK Jr. I mean, I don't know a ton about RFK Jr.'s policy. I know he's got this wacky idea about 3% government-backed home loans. I'm like, dude, was he in the country 16 years ago? Does he understand how the fake cheap money for mortgages, how that story ends? I don't think he's got great economic ideas. I think he's a little conspiratorial. He's right on how they mismanaged COVID, but he's wrong on the reasons. Look, at the end of the day, I like a third party candidate. I'd like him to do well. I applaud him for going independent and not do. It's like, I was just talking about Tulsi Gabbard flipping parties. I'm like, I respect a person who says my party is no longer aligned with me. That doesn't mean I now align with this party that I've been saying is the complete opposite of what I believe in for 30 years in politics. So I respect the fact that he's like, the Democrat Party doesn't align with me anymore, but he's not trying to jump ship and go Republican. I think he's standing on his beliefs, so I like that. Well, this comment here is worth responding to, um, from busy me. If I'm reading that right, sorry, I'm old and blind, but and I have my glasses in the living room. Um, yeah, I've said this, I've made this point before, and it's that people, I think a lot of people don't recognize that Donald Trump and Barack Obama got elected for the same reason. And it is because they both appeared to be outsiders. Barack Obama came out of nowhere and ran against the ultimate, and both of them ran against the perfect candidate for them to run against. Hillary Clinton is the perfect candidate. Barack Obama got the Democrat nomination because he was running against somebody we were so sick of the status quo, and he was running against the poster child of the status quo, a freaking Clinton. And he was an outsider, and people just wanted a breath of fresh air after 8 years of Bush, and like the whole thing was a mess. And so he just looked like this this ultimate outsider. Of course, he governed like everybody else governs. He governed just like the status quo, but he was elected because he was an outsider. And I think when Trump came onto the stage, people voted for him for the exact same reason. He looked like he was this outsider coming from outside politics that people viewed as uncorruptible because he was already independently wealthy. And I think that's when you say that he looks like an independent candidate who took over the Republican Party, I think you're right. And the interesting thing about that is I think that's the reason he won. And I still think that, and this is what I mean when I say that the Democrats have resurrected his political career from the dead, is that the fact that all these institutions are now aligning against him make him look again like this outsider, and that's why he's where he's at right now. I honestly think if nobody had brought a charge against Donald Trump, if they just let him go quietly into that good night, he would be completely irrelevant right now. I don't know who the Republican nominee would be, but I don't think it would have been Donald Trump. I think the Republican Party was ready to move on from him until he started getting, I don't want to say persecuted. I don't think he's a martyr, but you know what I mean? I think that's what brought him back to life. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in here, tumbleweed real quick with can we stop using the word democracy? A constitutional republic is a form of democracy. We're a representative democracy. It's what a constitutional republic is. I get a lot of people who say, well, we're not a democracy. Well, we are a democracy. We're just not a direct democracy. We're not a majority rules democracy. We're a republic. So we're a representative democracy. It's a type of democracy. So I don't know why that bothers me when people say that. I don't like semantic arguments. It's just like, it's just, picture of the guy. Yeah, if either side picked, I don't. But here's the thing about if either side picked another candidate, Mike. I don't know if you're still in here or not. If you are, let me know. Throw me a quick comment. But I don't think I can pin your comments once you're gone, so I think you're still in here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If either side picked another candidate, they'd run away with 2024. I would say here's the thing that gets me is I don't know who you could choose on the Democrat side. I don't know who on the Democrat ticket. I think that's why they feel stuck with Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is wildly unpopular. I think Gavin Newsom's politics would not stand up to national scrutiny. He is way too far to the left. California's a mess. I don't think he's going to stand up to national scrutiny. So I don't know who on the Democrat side. If they'd chosen RFK, if they nominated RFK as the Democrat candidate, he could probably beat Trump. But I don't know who else on the Democrat side of the ticket would beat Trump. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, who would beat him. But I don't know that. I don't know about that. Yoda for president. Thoughts on the disastrous wars going on and how Biden has handled them. Let's pin this one. Well, it's an interesting thing. At first, I honestly don't know that Russia invades Ukraine if Donald Trump is still president. And I know that that's an unpopular thing amongst Democrats to say, but I don't know that there's a war in the Ukraine right now if Donald Trump is still president. And it's also very funny to me that people called Trump a Putin plant, but Putin didn't try and take Ukraine until Trump was out of office. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. I don't lay the entire blame for Ukraine at the feet of Joe Biden. These are mistakes that we've made going back to the 80s. Disarmament of NATO, a pulling back of our forces, even potentially a dismantling of NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union was probably the right thing for the West to do, instead of increasing our military presence and bringing more nations into NATO and growing this military alliance whose sole purpose at its founding was to counter the Soviet threat. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, continuing to expand NATO to me was an outright act of aggression. So I don't really expect Russia to behave any differently than they have. So I think that was a big mistake, and I don't lay that at Joe Biden's feet. That being said, give Russia Crimea, which is the deal that Putin's put on the table, and let's end this thing. Ukraine can't win. You just go to Statista or any Jane's Defense or any place that does military analysis and look at the military imbalance between Ukraine and Russia. The only reason this thing is still going on is because Russia is fighting this war the same way that the United States fought Vietnam. It's a half-measure war because they're trying to prevent escalation. Ukraine can't beat Russia, and if we weren't giving them money and supplies, this thing would have been over a long time ago. And at the bottom line is, the Ukrainian people are suffering because we're prolonging a war that should have been over a long time ago. So, as far as Israel and Hamas, that's a thousands of year old conflict that I do not and have not studied the history of that, and it'd be foolish of me to think I could comment on it. I'll say nothing more than outside of the fact that once again, I'm with the founding fathers in terms of we shouldn't be involved in these alliances and be involved in all these military conflicts all over the globe. Let's see here. That's not what Zelensky thinks. So the Zelensky thing is kind of funny because the idea that I'm just like, we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. You had Hunter Biden in Ukraine working for this major thing. You have Joe Biden bragging about getting their prosecutor fired for, attempting, like, I just think if that was Donald Trump Jr. and it was Trump, to me, it's like, what else did Hunter Biden have to sell the Ukraine other than access to Joe Biden? And the fact that now Joe Biden's president of the United States and we're funneling all this money to Ukraine, the whole thing seems gross and sketchy to me. And I don't like Zelensky. And here, I don't like Putin. I don't like Zelensky. We're choosing sides in a war between two shitty choices, and we should just stay the hell out of it. That's where my opinion is on these wars. But let's see. Thanks for the follow. We could have stopped the war from the beginning. Yeah, I don't want to be in a conflict with Russia. I have no desire to be in a conflict with Russia. Secondly, I'm telling you right now, the United States Armed Forces are not as ready for anything of any kind of significant ground combat against a military that's even close to us. I don't think that our military, we are technological terror. But I think if you got through the United States' technology and you put us in a war where our troops had to go on the ground and fight their troops, I look around America right now and I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. All right, let me scroll up here, see what else is going on. Thanks for the follows. They are greatly appreciated. The Russian thing is shady with Trump. I don't know, man. I like I said, I don't have. It's so like people are like, oh, the Russian thing is shady with Trump. We're giving hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukraine. And you can't, if you think Trump's relationship with Putin is shady, then you can't say that the relationship between the Ukraine and the Biden family isn't shady. I mean, if we're going to be objective and nonpartisan about this, how could you're going to accuse the Trumps of being too close to Russia while we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukraine and not go, yeah, this is sketchy with the point is the whole damn thing is pretty sketchy. But, and again, I go, if Trump was such a buddy with Putin, why didn't Putin try and take Ukraine while Trump was actually still in office? Wouldn't that have been the time to do it? Foreign aid. We're helping. Yeah. See, so that's, and I'm telling you right now, if the Trump family, you say, have you ever heard about foreign aid? Let me just pin this comment so I can just respond to it really quickly. Have you heard about foreign aid? We're helping a war. And I'm telling you, Connor, and I believe this, that if Donald Trump were president right now and Donald Trump Jr. had the relationships in Ukraine that Hunter Biden had, and Donald Trump was the president right now, and we were sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukraine, you would just be all over this as like a conspiracy between the Trump family and the Ukraine. That's where your mind would be. I'm positive of that without knowing you. Maybe thought Trump was going to win. So he had 4 years of Trump in office and didn't do anything. But then under the thought that Trump was going to win, he's like, now's my time. Or you're saying that he thought Trump was going to win. And when Trump lost, which is the timeline, sorry, I got confused on the timeline there, that he decided now's the time. I don't know. I guess I don't think that was going to, do you think that Trump winning was going to hand him Ukraine? I don't think that's the case. Maybe I'm wrong, but you might want, but even if I don't want her city Atlantis, I'm with you on that. But CNN said Trump bad, Biden good. Yeah, the media's on that, man. The media's been on that, and I said this in my last live when I talk about Trump. I don't like getting in a position where I have to defend him because he's not my guy. But man, the media was wow. I mean, it was kind of like we're not journalists, and we just don't care that you know it. On their investment in the vine, Ukraine's getting a good return on their investment on the vine. I mean, it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue the point that. It's really hard to argue the point that there's not something weird going on. I know a podcast I listen to, they're like, it feels like the Ukrainians have something on Biden, and that he's being blackmailed. What we're doing in Ukraine just doesn't make a ton of sense, especially when you consider that at multiple times it's been, hey, Putin has said, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, that Putin has said, look, give me Crimea, and I know that there's the appeasement strategy, and there's Germany, there's World War II, and appeasement isn't necessarily, it doesn't have a great track record. But I guess the question would be, is we're sending all this money to Ukraine, and Macron, the president of France, said, we're not going to rule out Western boots on the ground. And I know that a lot of the NATO allies came out and said, no, there's no way, and there's no way. I feel like that's just the primer. Like, yes, absolutely. At some point, there's going to be Western boots on the ground. And the question you have to ask yourself is Russia in the nuclear age, is Russia or is Ukraine worth the risk of a global war? Because if we get involved with Russia, there's no reason to think that China won't make a move on Taiwan. And we're in World War III. And the three nuclear powers are duking it out. And you got to ask yourself if it's worth it. Why fund any war, really? Protect the country. They only do this when they feel like they have. Yeah. So I go back to that. Why fund any war? I'm 100% on board that. Look, if Western Europe wants to defend itself against Russia, let Western Europe defend itself from Russia. I guess the United States is safe. We should be investing in ourselves. Our military should be about half. We should be spending about half of what we spend on our military. Minimum reduction in what our military spending should be. We are rapidly escalating our debt crisis, and it's insane that we think that we can add $1 trillion. I think today I read an article, and I don't know how, you read all these different articles, you don't know what's accurate, what's not. $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days. Certainly we're running greater than $1 trillion deficits. We can't afford to do this. We are bankrupting ourselves. We're bankrupt already. We're sacrificing our future, blood, treasure. We're risking a global war with a nuclear power, potentially two nuclear powers. For what? What are we doing here? I mean, and where are the anti-war Democrats at? Where did you guys go? It was one of the few things I was like, hey, they're right about this. And they're just gone. Where are the anti-war Democrats? Our enemies. Let's just let our enemies violate. Thanks for the follow. I appreciate it. The likes are warming the cockles of my old heart. Let's see here. Americans try to prevent this. Republicans are in Putin's pockets. Real Americans try to prevent this. Republicans are in Putin's pockets. I guess I don't understand. I've asked this question before. I don't understand. If Republicans are in Putin's pockets, why didn't Putin try and take the Ukraine when the Republicans were in? Nobody's been able to answer that question for me yet. Why didn't the Russians try and take Ukraine when the Republicans were in control? If the Republicans are bound to Putin, it's a pretty simple question. Like, what's the reason? There isn't even a negotiation. Putin never came to the table and said, hey, Trump, give me Crimea or I'm going to invade Ukraine. There was never any threats. There was never any of that stuff where Trump could have been, where Putin and Trump could have tried to manipulate public perception to think that Trump was giving them Crimea to prevent a war. It was never an issue until Trump was out of office. So it seems odd that, like, Trump's a Putin puppet, the Republicans are in Putin's pockets, and the moment there's a Democrat president, now it's the time for the Russians to invade Ukraine. That doesn't make sense, I guess, but maybe I'm crazy. Republican Congress approved way too much funding. There was no new conflict started under Donald Trump. And that's another thing I think that the media has to answer for, which is if Donald Trump becomes president, it's going to be World War III. We heard that this guy's going to have his finger on the nuclear button. It's going to be the end of the world. It's going to be World War III. 4 years, no new conflicts. 4 years, no new conflicts. I mean, when was the last time you could say that about a president of the United States, that he went through his entire term without starting a new conflict? I don't think Trump did enough to roll back our military imperialism, but no new conflicts for 4 years is a big deal. People, I don't think he gets enough credit for that. Because Trump couldn't cheat and win again with Russia. Trump, okay. That's kind of an odd take, I guess, but NATO was still intact, even though Trump tried desperately to dissolve it. I don't know that Trump doesn't have to try. Look, a president of the United States doesn't have to try and dissolve NATO. The United States just has to stop giving them money. And that's it. That's the end of NATO. The president of the United States could withdraw troops, all American troops and assets from Europe tomorrow. He is the commander in chief. That's completely within his authority. And he cannot authorize any additional funding or military spending in Europe. He doesn't have to dissolve NATO. He just has to not participate. If Trump desperately wanted to end NATO, that's the end of NATO. So I don't think so. Got too many mainstream media watchers in here. Well, it's mainstream media. People watch it. Trump will try to take. Look, here's something interesting for Shadow Dog. I think that Trump will try to take us out of NATO. I just made a pretty easy case that he doesn't have to try. He just has to withdraw our troops from Europe and stop giving them money. It's a pretty easy thing to do. But I think what you're waiting for is some kind of an opposition to that. Good. Get us the hell out of NATO. How about that? Why are we paying to defend Western Europe while they look down their nose at us because we don't have universal health care? Yeah, well, we're picking up the big ticket items like national defense. So, get us out of NATO. I'm perfectly fine with that. Back in 2004, we should have pulled out of NATO. We should have started slowly dismantling NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO's purpose was to counter the Warsaw Pact. It was to counter the Soviet threat. When the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO should have started dismantling and welcomed Russia and its states into the world economy without trying to bring those states into a military alliance formed against the Soviet Union. It was like a ridiculous thing. So if California and Texas left the United States tomorrow, the United States collapses under the weight of its debt. This is not actually a far-fetched scenario right now. The United States collapses under its debt. We experience hyperinflation. Texas, California, maybe a couple other states are like, we're out. We're going to declare our independence. And that the next thing you know, Russia and China start establishing military alliances